And let's now bring in International Relations Policy Specialist Sourabh Gupta for more on this year's Summit of the Future and that pact. Sourabh, thanks so much for joining us. Just how crucial is this revamp the UN is trying to achieve with the Summit of the Future to get members to renew and to strengthen their commitments and follow through? This summit has been 3 years in the making.
Oh, I think it's exceptionally important and exceptionally timely. There was an opportunity immediately after the end of the Cold War when there was this hope for global multilateralism, but that has not really come to fruition. And we have a fear, and we see the world kind of breaking down into a more block-based structures. There is the West, which wants to lead a like-minded group of nations and make the rules. There's obviously a much larger cohort of emerging economies and other countries which are rising and want their voices heard. And in between the two of them, between these two major players, global governance is what has suffered, and therefore vitally important, led by the UN Secretary General, who is in the best position to champion multilateralism, to rededicate oneself to multilateralism so that the future can be better for all of us.
Yeah, Guterres didn't mince any words, for sure. After a few tweaks, the Pact for the Future was adopted earlier today. What are some of the key action plans that stand out to you in that pact?
The key action plans are essentially to modernize the global multilateralism for the challenges of the day going forward. Of course, one of that we all know is in terms of Security Council reform, and that the UN and its main bodies should not be a reflection of what happened 80 years ago. But at the same time, there are other challenges which have come and which are very well known. I mean, in terms of climate change, in terms of technology, in the last 20 years, the way technology has moved forward, sometimes one gets the sense that humans are falling behind in terms of governing their own technologies that they are creating. And it is in these areas that the call is going out to rededicate oneself to championing multilateral solutions and UN-centered solutions, so that there is a broad-based consensus on how we go forward and can do it in the most fruitful way. What I would say is that the UN system, which we had, the 1945 system, wasn't created in 1 week. It took a long time to create, particularly the financial system was a lot of ideas thrown over 20 years, which then came to fruition in the form of the World Bank and the IMF. So what Mr. Guterres is trying to do is kick off that conversation so that the global multilateralism can be secured and it can work for all of us.
Sourabh, there are a few overarching goals, such as, sustainability, the youth movement, future generations, and global governance. How realistic are they?
Now, one has to understand we aren't living in great times. These are difficult time, a difficult age in which we are living in. It's not a terrible age that we are living in. We can make these changes if we can dedicate ourselves to wanting to make these changes. One has to bear in mind think about in the 60s and 70s at the height of the Cold War, when one would think that the two sides had just broken down into block-based structures. We had the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In the early 1980s, we had the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, bringing many parties to the table. And so the possibility is there, if there is good thinking and good planning in terms of trying to get parties on board. At the end of the day, the United States and also China will say that we want to dedicate ourselves to multilateralism because that is the way we can even safeguard, cushion, and guardrail our competition between these two countries. And therefore, one must understand this is not going to happen overnight, and it might take much more longer than a decade. But as I just said, the UN-centered system was not created in a week. It was created over decades, perhaps. And if we kick off the conversation today in what needs to be done, we can stop the dissolution into block-based structures and once again rededicate ourselves to UN-centered international law-based procedures going forward.
Sourabh, only about 30 seconds left. You touched on it, but China's Wang Yi speaks to the summit on Monday. Any thoughts on what he could say?
Well, I would tend to think that he will be championing the Global Civilization Initiative, the Development Initiative, and the Security Initiative. These are comprehensive initiatives, UN-centered, and without us versus them framework, and where China is in a position to both champion these and sustain these through financing mechanisms. So I would expect that he would focus his remarks in terms of the comprehensiveness of the challenge and China's what China can do in terms of supporting this UN-centered system going forward.
All right, Sourabh Gupta, thank you so much for your time. We'll leave it there.
You're most welcome.